Hello?
Hello. How's it
Hi.
going? Hi.
I'm driving and I'm really not supposed to talk without talking.
Hello. Have fun. We all know here. Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Am I clear enough?
Yeah, you're clear. Yeah.
Oh, perfect.
Okay. So, I actually have just one question. So we know that CCP actually, besides doing the obvious lobby and infiltration for the benefit of China, in basically all aspects of society. Besides that, they also would infiltrate on the other side, so to control the narrative that are against China to play both sides, so that they can, well, in some ways control, say for example in Canada, control the Canadian narrative. So I'm wondering if the politicians are actually aware of this, and as citizens, what we can do to be vigilant about the controlling of the narrative on the other side as well.
I think that in Canada there's certainly some concern about PRC control of Chinese language media. You know, it's aside from Falun Gong media, there almost every Chinese language media in Canada seems to have gradually become more pro PRC. I think there is a movement in Canada to restrict the distribution of mainland Chinese TV, the CGTN, Zhongyang Tai, on the basis that in the past they've broadcast forced confessions by people who have been arrested in China, like Peter Dallin or Peter Humphreys, and that shouldn't be allowed. That they shouldn't be allowed to publicize this kind of activity in Canada. So, I think that there's some concern about it, but as I was saying before, I think there's a latent assumption on the part of Canadian politicians that all ethnic Chinese in Canada support the views of the CCP, and so they're reluctant to restrict them. And then there's some objective problems, such as Weixin, WeChat. WeChat is used for surveillance and gathering of information and censorship and putting out false news. But if WeChat was made illegal in Canada for that reason, how would people in Canada communicate with their friends and family in the PRC, as WeChat is so omnipresent? So there are a lot of issues here that are a big concern as China more and more dominates. I mean, I think the big one actually, Charles, would be the COVID-19, and China's putting out all kinds of crazy theories to deflect the global attention on finding out the true origins of the pandemic. This kind of thing. We really have to come up with some means to ensure that you don't get a lot of fake news going out there deceiving people. But on the other hand, in our societies, we have to maintain the freedom of expression that's central to what makes our societies so great.
Yeah, I think I would like to maybe address another aspect that's more incendiary, which is that I think the CCP also would like to control the opposition voices by, say, for example, creating fissures between the advocacy groups, and also try to create a opposition group by themselves to create a narrative that would be beneficial for them. I understand that perhaps not, well, all opposition might look bad for China, but if they can control it, then the respective governments may not be able to exert the opposition voices into full legislative effect. So I'm wondering if, say, CSIS or other intelligence agencies or the Canadian government is aware that this is a possibility?
I think the main problem here, I agree with you. I mean, the Tongzhan Bumen, the United Front Work Department, is extremely sophisticated in their operations and have been for so many years. And they put so much resources into this and training, to become a United Front Work operative. You study in Beijing for 4 years. So a lot of stuff about psychological manipulation. And I think that what you're saying is right. There are also these fake NGOs everywhere, fake Chinese associations that put in statements in newspapers, and then when you try and follow up on them, you find that they really don't exist at all. But it's the same thing. It's so hard to sensitize governments to the fact that this kind of very sophisticated manipulation is going on, and it seems like the CCP always ends up on top, and certainly within the Chinese, the Chinese Canadian community, there's so much splits, factionalism in the pro Hong Kong democracy elements, and in terms of like ethnic Chinese democracy organizations abroad, those are so badly factionalized and penetrated by CCP that there is no effective voice for promoting democracy in China that has any ability to counter the much stronger and more effective and better organized activities of the other side. So I think what you raise are very significant questions, but the solution will only come if we can raise awareness and get political support to try and straighten things out.
I'm wondering, Charles, is there anything that you are doing right now on this topic that you can tell us and share about?
Well, I have been doing a lot of research on Canadian people of influence in Canada who are receiving benefits from the PRC state, and I hope that this will be exposed and we'll better understand who is influencing Canadian policy and how it is that they have been receiving benefits from China. But this is very challenging work because of the risk of lawfare and getting getting it wrong. In other words, making false allegations against people. I've already been sued by a former Canadian municipal cabinet minister, Michael Chan, over an article that I wrote in 2015 called "The Murky World of Chinese Influence." That at that time, Mr. Chan sued the Globe and Mail Inc., the newspaper is called the Globe and Mail, publisher of the Globe and Mail, the editor of the Globe and Mail, and a reporter, Craig Hoffman, who had written articles about Mr. Chan's connections to the Chinese consulate in Toronto. The case has never come to court, but the amount of money that the Globe and Mail has had to pay to defend it is enormous. I don't think it will ever appear in court, and I don't think that Mr. Chan will ever be required to answer questions from the Globe and Mail reporter about these allegations. And also the allegations that were raised against me in the statement of claim, many of them are false, but I have no means to correct them until it actually comes to court. So this kind of very well-funded activity, is a big concern in terms of people being intimidated to keep quiet for fear of retaliation, not to speak of persons of Chinese origin who have family in Hong Kong or China that could be subject to menace and harassment if the Chinese authorities decide to do that because of activities of their family in the free world.
Hiroshi, you have something to say?
Oh, I can say a few words. Actually, I'm Hiroshi. I'm come from Carleton University. I am a Hong Konger. I know Mimi and Henry as well. But I just want to share about something about Chinese like CCP influence on campus. Because I realized that our campus is a really big place that CCP did a lot of influence. And for example, through my connection, the previous events such as the Pepper Walk event, the Pepper Walk ventilations. We have members that we have members from my group that comment on Pepperwalk comment on Pepperwalk Google comments, and he got dusted. I'm really surprised. Like he got dusted, and all of his information is exposed to the public, like what he's studying, where he's living. I'm pretty surprised. Like, wow, I'm like CCP influence is so powerful. So, well, I mean, yeah, it's a big issue definitely, and I hope that Canadian's government actually concerned about the influence of CCP. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I would just say, that the Chinese Students and Scholars Associations on campuses, including Carleton, the members are all PRC passport holders. But the Chinese embassy and consulate putting pressure on those students, organizing them to participate in pro PRC rallies and so on, and pressuring them to make reporting about activities on campus is actually, they should be, the PRC students should be protected from that under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms applies to anybody on the soil of Canada, not simply Canadian citizens. And so I really think that our government should be much more proactive in ensuring that there aren't inappropriate activities being undertaken by Chinese diplomats in Canada and working in education office against people on university campuses. When I was arrested by the Chinese Ministry of State Security in Shanghai in August the 3rd, 2018, and in the course of their interrogation of me, they asked me about a lot of things that they said I had said or written, and then I was puzzled. One of them was that I'd urged that the Canadian government's diplomatic posts in China should no longer hire Chinese nationals in those positions, and I couldn't remember having said anything like that. But then I realized that I had said it in the course of my lectures at Brock University on Chinese politics, and that they had people taking notes on my lectures that evidently had penetrated all the way back to Beijing in terms of my the file that they had on me that they were using to subject me to interrogation. So the activity, like that sort of activity, is really not right. We shouldn't be tolerating Chinese espionage services or coercion of people in Canada, because we should be protecting people in Canada in accordance with our laws and Canadian respect for human rights.
Absolutely, I 100% agree with that, and I actually heard that CCSA on my campus has influenced by the embassy of China. and I noticed that the student who came from China to studying in Carleton, they actually have the contact of embassy, and they literally and this and this things is told by one of my by one of my friends who is not Chinese, definitely, and I'm not sure where the news come from, but definitely this is news that I realized that that things the student who came from China, they actually have the contact of the embassy, and yeah, I'm very surprised, and they exchange a lot of information about the. I mean, I'm not sure what they are going to exchange, but probably they are going to exchange some information about the protesting in Hong Kong, about Hong Kongers in Canada. Yeah, and I have heard that the embassy of the staff in the embassy of China, actually came to CSSA meeting. Well, if I have a if I have a if I and actually record it, and I definitely will record it and send to LCMP, but I mean I'm definitely not a Chinese student, and the Chinese student noticed that I'm a Hong Konger. I support Hong Kong democracy. I definitely cannot go to the CSSA as a spy. So yeah.
Well, the other problem would be that, if Chinese students are taking courses in social science, that they would be afraid to participate freely in discussion. So that affects academic freedom in Canada because of the fear of anything they said that went against CCP being reported back to the embassy and put into their file in China, or affecting their family in China or career prospects and so on. So, that's pretty bad. But I don't think you'll be able to do much spying on CSSA. It's very difficult.
Hi, Samuel. How are you doing?
Hey yo, not too bad, surviving. Okay, I just heard you said something, so I decided I may as well jump in. I work in a university. Well, I work in 2 universities. Yeah, what you said about Charles, what you said about academic freedom is totally true. For some Chinese students, it's very hard for them to kind of like be open and talk about what's going on in China. Not that they don't want to talk about it, but more about like they have that fear in their mind. They just can't, because like most of them are going back to China after they graduate, and most of them are going to work in China for the rest of their lives. They're not going to risk that. Like I remember when I was a college kid, when I went to a school in California, like there was one time in one of the lectures, a professor just happened to talk about something about like the June 4th incident, the Tiananmen incident, which is yesterday, which is kind of funny. And then somehow one student just like stood up and shouted at the professor and be like, "No, that never happened." And then it's a whole
Seriously?
argument about that between the professor and the student. And there's no way. Okay, by the way, there's no way that the student can win the argument, because the professor has the authority, and obviously, by the way, the professor is half Asian, and his mom only speaks Cantonese. And I have spoken to his mom, which is funny in that way. And then the professor basically said, well, just go to the library. We got clips, we got pictures. You can listen to some of the audios. And it's obviously you can kind of do your own research, and you can come back to me and be like whether it's true or not. But at the moment, you have no ground to argue about it. That student just left. So the conversation doesn't go anywhere. And I believe that for some of the students, not that they don't know about it. Okay, that student definitely didn't know about it, and that student need to do some research. But anyways, not that they don't know about it, but they try not to talk about it. And for some reasons, if you talk about this to like many Chinese students, they would say they know it. But But then what? Well, nothing can happen, because even if you know it, it's not going to change much, and you still have to go back to China. You know your boundaries. You know your boundaries too well. That's all I want to say, talking about academic freedom.
Hi, Charles. This is Peter. I don't know whether you still remember me. I have several occasions meet you before. But I'd like to follow up about this gentleman, Mr. Michael Chen. Actually, I know Michael for over 20 years because he used to be a insurance agency before he joined politics, right? And then I have 2 or 3 occasions tried to get some insurance from him. And I think at that time, it was probably 25 years ago. It's not like, since he joined politics, I think he leave his insurance business to somebody else. But at that time, I find out this guy is very sort of like, I feel this guy is something wrong, right? But I was thinking, this guy is just probably a very sneaky insurance agent. Nothing personal against the insurance agency, right? But so I deal with him 2 or 3 times, and then I follow him. He get into politics, and then he get into cabinet minister, cabinet position, and then there are more and more rumors about this individual that he's getting benefits from the CCP. But so far, I talked to a lot of people that live in Markham for years and know this guy, and they didn't find any real solid evidence, right? But they always said that this guy is very, very close to the Chinese ambassador down in Toronto, right? Whenever he have any dinner or any events, all the top guns in the Chinese consulate show up. So I just wonder, say, like, I heard some rumors that this guy is a little bit of having some medical issue in the last 2 years or something. And then now in the community, no one even talked to him anymore. And I'm quite surprised when you told me about that case, because I read that article many years ago, and I don't know that they put your name in that statement of claims too. But I don't think that he can proceed this, and I don't think you can ever be able to bring this case to court, because I don't think he got much ground to stand in court. And that's my general statement.
Yeah, I would say, before I wrote the article, The Murky World of Chinese Influence, the Globe and Mail libel lawyers read it over to make sure that there was nothing in there that that was libelous against Mr. Chan. And they didn't change anything because I didn't say anything that, was wrong. It's simply that CSIS had gone to the Premier of Ontario and said that Mr. Chan was having a very, very high frequency of telephone calls with the Chinese Consul General in Toronto, and they didn't tell the Premier, what the content of those telephone calls was, but that, it's very irregular for a minister of the Crown to be communicating so frequently with a relatively low-ranked diplomatic figure. And, he wasn't having any high level of conversations with the Consul General of any other countries in Toronto, of which, there are like 80 of them. So, I think that there might be something there, but as you say, if Mr. Chan had done anything that was against the laws of Canada, then the RCMP would surely, charge him, and he would have a chance to defend himself in court. But that's never happened because they don't have any. There is no evidence of wrongdoing. It's simply an observation that he seemed to have a lot of contact with Chinese diplomatic officials. And I think that, with regard to the government of Ontario, Michael Chan was excellent at fundraising. he got a lot of money for the party, and so they didn't want to have any, it would be bad for the party if Mr. Chan was no longer there with all the fundraising that he was doing in the Chinese community. So that was more or less where it stands. And yeah, I'd heard that he wasn't in good health, and I guess he's retired from politics now. And but I still read about him on WeChat. He's still saying things. All of them seem to be things that the Chinese government would like to hear. But I guess he must be getting on in years. Maybe I don't know the detail. I wish him all the best in retirement, I guess. I don't think he's selling insurance anymore.
No. He didn't sell insurance for years. But since we talked about the campaign fundraising, right? One thing that I say, like I always buy ticket no matter which party the candidates are, right? I just want to see who's showing up, right? But in the last several years, say like I live in Richmond Hill, right? Say like my MP is Liberal, my MPP is PC, and the local government is, most of them are pro-China. And but in the last 4 or 5 years, when I show up in one of those, say like campaign dinner, I find out that Tong Xiangwei, I don't know whether you know what I'm talking about. Those Chinese group are mostly occupy 70 to 85% of the tables. So like you see the force there, right? So in that case, they probably buy a whole bunch of tickets, say for $100, $150, and then they deliver to those community members to say, hey, this is a freebie, go for a free dinner, it's a good dinner, and blah, 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 right? So because one time I sit with a whole group of people from mainland China, they even don't know the candidates. They don't know what's going on. They just go for a good dinner. That's it. So like that's why it's so hard to say like get some solid evidence to say, hey, so and so is receiving money from so and so, right? So because they play so well, that is hard. Say now they even get into the school board candidate now. I mean, they get into every level: school board, Catholic board, public board, local councillor, regional councillor, mayor, MPP, MP, every level.
Yeah, I think it's a coordinated campaign, and aside from those fundraising dinners, they're also often they will provide help to the candidates in their campaign. Workers to lick envelopes and bang signs into the front lawn of people and so on, and so that ingratiates them to the candidate who feels that he owes them some favors once he's in power, or they can contact him, if they call him and say, I want to tell you my view. Those people who have some connection to the CCP he's going to take the call and take what they say seriously, because he feels obligation to them because of the help that they gave him in his political campaign.
But anyway, it's very scary. See, like I live in this country for 50 years now. The last 20 years really bad. That's what I feel more and more the pressure that these guys are coming, that we are losing the Canadian identity. And I always joke with my wife, right? I say my grandkids have to deal with all these CCP invasion to our country in Canada now. Not me, because I'm 71 and I don't know how long I still can live. But I feel more and more stressed about all these guys are sort of like getting into our everywhere, no matter whether private, public, you name it. They are everywhere now.
Yeah, that's the worry, that it gets so consolidated we can't get out of it, right?
Yep. I'm scared that I cannot get out of it. But as I told my wife, I say, I probably don't have to face it because of my age. It's my kid and my grandkid have to face it. If we don't change the government just drastically, like Australia or some of these Scandinavian countries.
Yeah. Well, let's see what happens at the Group of Seven meetings in England that are coming up. Maybe Canada will get together.
Honestly, I don't expect a lot from the G7 meeting.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm with you, but I always try and hope, right?
You're always optimistic, I think.
Well, I mean, I'm my age. I'm starting to get like you. You know, you sort of feel like it's how long do we put up with this? You know, when's it ever going to end?
Yeah. So I used to look at the Hong Kong news every day and all this. Now I feel so depressed. I even don't have the guts to turn on the Chinese TV anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like anniversary of June 4th. You know.
Yeah, it's sad.
32 years later, everybody who was involved in the movement is old. There's no sign of it having had any impact in China. You know, nothing left, and the those exiles that came out after the June 4th, they seem to be weak and divided. So every time it comes around to June 4th, I feel so dispirited, you know, not like it's a bad attitude to take, but I just think it just makes me feel depressed that it's another June 4th, because I remember the spirit of all those 32 years ago when people were really optimistic that they could make very positive democratic transformation in China, and so many years later, you know, it seems just worse and worse.
Well, it sounds like we have a lot to do, but at the same time, as I have mentioned before to multiple people, is that fellow Canadians, they don't seem to be awakened as yet. And I think this is our major challenge, because people feel still very comfortable with what's going on.
No, not just that. A lot of my yellow friends are moving towards the blue. So I got
my
less
goodness.
and less friends now, especially those people in my age group, that say the 65 to 75, right? And they always said, "Oh, gee, you know, the country is so good in China. Why the hell all these young generation are so rebellion, right?" So basically, we used to have a lot of friends belongs to the yellow color, right? Now, I think it's only 5 or 6 left in my age group.
How did that even make sense?
I don't know, because I think people like the status quo. I think people believe that China is so strong that we as overseas Chinese feeling proud, and then we don't have to be sort of like looked down by the white or by the Caucasian and all this. That's what a lot of my friends at my age tell me about, why they switch to the blue color.
But we
Which
are
is very
Canadians. We are not like our country is Canada, and whatever they are doing is not good for Canada. What's wrong with them?
Because those guys think that, hey, we feel proud to be a Chinese now, because you see what happened. We send people up to the moon. Our high tech is so good. We got the One World, One Belt. We got all these goodies going on everywhere. We have all these vaccines. Say, like, believe it or not, I got friends that want to go to Hong Kong to get the Chinese vaccine. Say, they don't prefer Pfizer. They don't prefer Moderna and all these, right? They say, "Oh, I want a Chinese-made vaccine." I say, "Good luck." That's what I can say, right?
So ridiculous. Just so ridiculous.
Oh my goodness. Like, why are they even in Canada if they love China
No,
that much?
these guys live here for 30, 40 years. Say, a lot of my friends are, say, like, we leave Hong Kong because of the education. We want to come here to say like get university education because in say like Mimi, your generation is much younger than us, right? Say like in our generation, the age 65 to 75, it's so hard to get into a Hong Kong university because in those days only Hong Kong university. I think later they have the Chinese university. Now they have so many. So people are moving to the States or to Canada or Australia for the education. So when they settle down, because all those people came so long ago, they always feel that, oh, we are degraded by the white people. We always do lousy things. And then these guys, we never get a promotion in a big corporation and vice versa, right? So there are people still feel like that. And then all of a sudden, 20, 30 years ago with the uprise of China, they say, oh, we can stand up, we can move our head up, and then we cannot be degraded by the white or the Caucasian anymore. So there are still a lot of people feel like that.
How?
Yeah, you should answer the question I'm about to ask. Actually, like maybe I should ask my question, like why are they even here? Like if they love China so much.
Exactly.
But yeah, you did answer because like they've been here for like generations. Like they've been here for like 40, 50 years. Like for them, they don't really suffer. They are not in Hong Kong like now, or they were not in Hong Kong back then when it was the worst. Like I mean, like they don't really suffer what we suffer. Like if they're in China, see if they want to get out now.
No, I live in this country for 50 years. I still consider myself a Hong Kongese.
Yeah,
I love Canada, but I got 3 generations in Hong Kong. My grandfather was born in Hong Kong. My dad was born in Hong Kong. I was born in Hong Kong.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like 20 something. Like I'm still in my 20s, and it's hard to believe like people because I was in California. Like people at your age, like the older generation, like they are so damn blue. Like I don't know why. I mean, like why? Like you're already here. Like you ran away from China for God's sake.
But we used to get that. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the Cultural Revolution, and there were people in Canada who supported the Cultural Revolution and supported like terrible, like, you know, like if the Chinese government wouldn't let people listen to the music of Beethoven, they thought that was the right thing, or they wouldn't let them watch some Hollywood movies. But those people were in Canada listening to Beethoven and watching Hollywood movies, so they thought it's okay for China and Chinese people in China. But for me, I support the Cultural Revolution, but they wouldn't want to have, you know, the Cultural Revolution policy imposed on them, right? So it's this interesting psychology that, you know, how you could support the Chinese regime, but then they're destroying Hong Kong, you know. So
yeah, they like what's good about China, like I don't know about education, the space thing. Like they explore a lot of the outer space.
yeah,
they admire that, but they don't suffer, right? They don't suffer the lack of freedom. They don't suffer that. So for them, it's like, oh yeah, I gear up myself saying that I'm from the Chinese background because I get, as you said, like tilt my head up. I don't have to be looked down. But it doesn't make sense because you're already not in China.
Yeah, that's why I've said it's very hard to understand. Makes no sense.
well, I mean, you know, the problem is that the CCP doesn't want people of Chinese ethnic origin, you know, children of the ancestors, the descendants of the Yellow Emperor, should always identify with the motherland, even if they have foreign citizenship and foreign passport. But of course, our idea is that once you become a Canadian, then you are loyal to Canada, right? Like you accept the basis of Canadian society and our democracy and everything else, and you know, you made a choice to become a Canadian. But the Chinese embassy refers to people, you know, the Canadians in Hong Kong, for example, as Canadian passport holders. They don't refer to them as Canadian citizens. And certainly I don't think they're going to respect their consular rights if some of those Canadians in Hong Kong end up being arrested. The Chinese regime will simply insist that they are Chinese.
Yeah. Hi, Chrislyn. You have something to say?
Yeah, well, I guess I found this actually a strange situation for Chinese Canadians in general because I've noticed that right now it's June, so it's Filipino Heritage Month actually, and I'm noticing that among Filipino Canadians, they don't have the same conflict with dual nationality in terms of just a Filipino nationality and a Canadian nationality. It's just that with Chinese nationality, so much as the People's Republic of China these days, is that there is a conflict in terms of ideology and in terms of just even the country's trajectory. But with say Filipinos, I'm noticing that they are able to hold both their basically patriotism even to the Philippines as well as to Canada. So it's unique to Chinese Canadians, and it's a troubling development. I think that's what I wanted to kind of interject with.
Yeah, I see what I mean. Like the whole Canadian passport holders thing, that just straight up bullshit. But I also think it's a trick that CCP planned on people. They want you to think that you still belong to them, and for me, it's just ridiculous. Like if you chose a country per se, well, you didn't really choose it. It's kind of like both. But then when you move to a new country, you got a new nationality. You basically belong to them. You don't have to be royalty China. China doesn't give a shit about you. Like if you got, let's say, murdered, is Chinese government going to save you? Not really, right? So to me, I'm not having a kid, but if I ever have a kid, I want my kid to look into a mirror and think that he or she is British. I want them to be like, I'm British, for the rest of their life. I don't want them to have that conflicts in their mind. Nationality doesn't matter even. It's more about the ideology that you have.
It's just that China's driving the whole thing so strong in terms of mixing ethnicity and nationality, and that's so unique to what they're doing there, and it doesn't actually match what other nations are doing. It's basically white supremacy except Tao supremacy.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that the ethnic identity Chinese and the citizenship Chinese are the same word, so that's such a confusion, right? I think it would be reasonable for people of Chinese ethnicity to feel proud in China's cultural achievements or putting things on the moon or technology and so on as an ethnic value, but that doesn't mean that you have to do what the Chinese Communist Party wants you to do in Canada.
We actually had that distinction in Cantonese / Mandarin. We have Huayan and Wayan as opposed to Zhongguoren and Zhongguoyan.
Yeah, but in English it's the same word, right? If you look at Malaysian,
it's terrible.
Yeah, the Malaysian would be like, I'm Chinese Malaysian, but you're not really Chinese in the political sense. You're Chinese in the cultural sense, or I mean, the word Chinese is formatting because it points at, it refers to a government. Not really. If you wish someone like a Chinese New Year, what you say isn't really Chinese New Year, right? It's more like a cultural New Year, and you belong to a culture, not a political party.
Yeah, I mean, you've got Huayi Janadara, and that makes sense. But the Chinese government is always confusing with Haiwai Chaobao, or these other concepts which mix up citizenship and ethnicity. And Xi Jinping has been doing a lot of this in his statements, which is just wrong. It used to be that they distinguished quite strictly between Huaren, like overseas Chinese, and Huaqiao, which should be people who have Chinese citizenship living overseas. But now we have these other confusing statements which try and blur this distinction. But it's an important distinction to maintain.
Yeah, it's a word trick. My grandma basically thinks that all Vietnamese, all Korean, all Japanese, all Indonesian is Chinese.
Yeah, but as long as they have the ethnic distinction, then they're okay with that, because I mean, in a sense, a lot of them did migrate over from parts of southern China, or what broadly defined, whatever that means, right? So,
yeah.
But then they're not Chinese as in like loyal to the People's Republic of China. It's very different. But people just don't make that distinction these days.
Exactly. Now I don't even say Chinese New Year anymore. I just wish people Happy New Year because like the word Chinese.
Lunar New Year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I mean it's an East Asian holiday. Like Koreans celebrate it, I think, as well, and it's not unique to China whatsoever.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I used to work with the Chinese Association here in Niagara, strangely enough, mostly translating from English into Chinese, because so many of those members didn't have the strong, literary Chinese skills. But for me, what happened was that the mainland Chinese took over the association, and previously, like we had a lot of activities in the Taishan dialect of Cantonese, because that was the dialect that most of the senior members of the community spoke. Those older immigrant families speak that language, and then of course you have the Hong Kong type Cantonese. But what the people who took over the association, coming in with lots of money and activities, insisted on everything should be in Mandarin, and that they should convert from fantizi, traditional characters, to simplified characters. Well, basically, they wanted to make those people no longer part of the association, and make it into an association connected to PRC, as opposed to an association, of Canadians, like talking about Canadian things of Chinese community, the history of Chinese in Canada. They didn't want to talk about that. They just wanted to talk about how we could be bridges between Canada and China. But for the older members of the association who spoke those Cantonese dialects, they weren't thinking about that at all. It just wasn't their idea of joining the association.
Yeah, I think languages are a big part of someone's existence or identity. Like when you deny someone's language, you're not denying just someone's language, you're denying someone's identity. Your right to be here, basically. Like the whole dialect/language thing is just bullshit. Like whenever people would be like, oh, a student of mine actually a few weeks ago be like, oh no, Cantonese is not a language, it's a dialect. I really like explained the whole thing to you. I was like, yeah, okay. If you do think so, explain why in the linguistic field, like you would agree that Cantonese is a dialect. But what you are saying now isn't really a linguistic thing, right? It's more like a political thing. You are saying Cantonese is a dialect, not a language, only because of political reasons. Really think about that. Like, is there any ground for you to say the same thing from a linguistic perspective? So now, when you are saying that Cantonese isn't a language, you are basically denying my identity, because a big part of me is speaking Cantonese. That's a big part of my identity. So you are basically doing a quote-unquote political trick. And I would be like, I would fight to my death for the existence for Cantonese as a language, because for me, it's a part of my identity that maintains me, that sustains me.
That doesn't make sense. Cantonese is not interpolable with Mandarin in terms of just.
Yeah, we got 9 tones, they got 4 tones.
I don't think, not even just the tones, like even just the grammatical structure can be very different. Linguistically, it doesn't make sense. So I think
exactly.
I think it stands.
I think the problem is they're not arguing about it from the linguistic perspective, right?
Just like propaganda, basically.
Yeah, it's only a political shit. So basically, it's a trick that you put on us, and I don't accept that.
Yeah, I know it's quite ridiculous with what's going on. And we were actually talking about there are so many people, they thought that when they learn Mandarin, they thought that they were learning as well the culture. But then right after, they realized all the culture is actually in Cantonese.
Exactly. Yeah. Someone said something about, like you know, in like the Chinese character, like war, like you have like a area that you have a jade in it, and I was like, you are learning the simplified at first.
Yeah, I know.
Well, the Chinese character language thing is one thing, but we have a lot of borrowed words in Cantonese.
Exactly.
That just don't work. But
at the same time, it's hard because people are, may I say, ignorant. Like when they say Chinese, they only mean Mandarin. Like for them, Chinese equals Mandarin, and it's a whole conversation if you want to if you want to do the whole explanation, like, oh yeah, Chinese is an umbrella term, and basically Cantonese is a kind of Chinese, and what you're learning is Mandarin, which is also a kind of Chinese, and that at least like 5 big areas of Chinese. And if you do the whole explanation, people will be like, no, just let me say Chinese, because it's easier for me.
I think the thing is even the PRC have distinctions between different dialects and things like that. Like they actually have like 50-something ethnic groups. So it's just a weird kind of even stereotype that we have in the Western world, where we just don't have an understanding of Chinese culture broadly speaking, and education is a big thing right now in terms of just I think the media has to do a better job, the government has to do a better job, and I think even at like the grassroots level, if we can just let people know, like this is actually a very diverse ethnicity, and then we can actually do better for next generation, just even for diversity or as Canadians, and to be more inclusive, things like that. So
exactly, use the word Mandarin. That's a specific word to be used, not Chinese. If you say Chinese is Mandarin, you're basically denying the existence of other kinds of Chinese. I mean, it's
Other
just weird,
dialects.
but then, you're right.
But when I was a student in China 40 years ago, none of my classmates could speak standard Mandarin. That was a later thing when TV and movies became generalized, and Mandarin is not a language that contains cultural content. It's a creation of the official state. And people, there are some people who can only speak Mandarin now, or a lot of children are losing their knowledge of their own language because of the imposition of Mandarin in education. But this is like relatively recent, and I think it's tragic that people's own language is being replaced by this official language, which has all kinds of, like you say, sort of cultural implications. Like you if you don't know your own language, you lose so much cultural richness in expression and just in a way of being. And with the Cantonese, that's the most significant. I mean, if they manage to get people in Hong Kong to lose Cantonese, what's left of Hong Kong?
Which is happening, by the way. I ran back to like Hong Kong just a couple of years ago, and I saw on the streets I already heard more Mandarin than Cantonese, and I know some primary schools are already teaching Chinese only in Mandarin.
Could actively make sure that CCP's capital is being ruled out in Canada. Thank
you. Well, there is the Cullen Commission dealing with this issue of those wealthy CCP-connected people who, transfer money to organized crime in China, and then the drug profits are used to provide them with money in Canada, which they then launder through casinos. And this has been something which, for I don't know what reason, the Canadian government has been quite tolerant of this kind of activity. People who show up in the casino with hockey bags full of $20 bills in bundles wrapped by rubber bands, which are almost certainly drug-related income that's being laundered. So that's certainly an issue. I think, in general, though, in terms of Chinese state investment in Canada, a principle of reciprocity would be good. Like, are we going to allow the Chinese state to get control of critical Canadian infrastructure, such as mines and transportation and telecommunications, when PRC, under the Constitution, does not allow foreign acquisition of natural resources there? And so I do think that what we want is relations that are reciprocal, fair, honest, transparent, and which have some mechanisms to ensure that the contracts are fairly realized. Like, it's very difficult for us to decouple completely with PRC and move all our economic activity to other countries. But right now, I think the the PRC regime takes advantage of Canada's open and trusting system to further its interests and economic coercion in our country in ways which is not in the overall interest of Canada. And to address that, we need proper legislation which addresses these phenomena and make sure that investment in Canada serves the overall interest of Canada and doesn't sacrifice our sovereignty to the interests of a sophisticated foreign regime. So, but the political will is just not there. There are too many Canadians who are receiving benefits from these deals and are prepared to turn a blind eye to some negative ways of operating. I mean, for example, when CNOOC took over Nexon, the Chinese company promised to maintain the Canadian management, but as soon as they acquired it, within a few months, they replaced the Canadian management with people sent out from China, and we have no means to prevent that. But the point is, they made a promise to us, and then they weren't honest in keeping the promise. Well, this is just not acceptable. We need to make sure that trade deals are done in ways which are of benefit to Canada, and certainly the idea of illegal money or people involved in organized crime who seem to have their pictures taken with diplomats from China. Something about this is very wrong, and we just need to give our police and CSIS and RCMP much more resources to be able to meet this very strongly organized, well-funded Chinese challenge and just make it work the way it's supposed to. But you need political will to put the resources in to make that happen, and there's a lot of resistance from people who are under the influence of China to prevent that from happening. We're way behind Australia and New Zealand in this area.